She came to the cemetery like she always did, alone, flowers trembling in her hands. The marble stone gleamed beneath the morning sun, etched with a name that still broke her. But that day, someone else was there. A young black woman knelt by the same grave, clutching a little girl who couldn't stop crying. Their grief looked raw, too personal, too close. The millionaire froze, heart pounding, watching the stranger whisper something to her son's name. And in that moment, one haunting question rose in her mind. Who were they? And why here? The wind swept gently through the rows of white stones, carrying the faint scent of lilies from nearby graves. Eleanor Price, once celebrated as one of the most powerful women in finance, stood still, her world narrowed to one engraved name. Daniel Price, her son, her only child. Gone 3 years now, and still, the silence felt louder than any boardroom she'd ever conquered. Every Sunday, she came here at dawn. No entourage, no designer heels, just a mother, stripped of everything money couldn't buy. The guilt always followed. She had built an empire, but lost her foundation the day Daniel's car went off that icy road. But this morning wasn't like the others. The sight of that woman and child lingered in her mind long after they'd left. The girl's sobs had been soft but full of pain, the kind that comes from remembering, not witnessing. Eleanor couldn't stop wondering, why were they crying at Daniel's grave? She replayed the moment in her mind as she walked back to her car. The woman's hands were trembling, her lips moving silently as if in apology. The little girl, maybe 6, maybe 7, had held a folded photo close to her chest. Eleanor had built her life on logic, precision, control. But nothing about this made sense. By the time she started the engine, the flowers she'd brought lay forgotten on the passenger seat. All she could think about was the look on that woman's face, grief tangled with something else, something that looked like guilt. Eleanor couldn't sleep that night. The image replayed again and again, the woman's bowed head, the child's tears, the photo pressed to her heart. She tried to brush it off as coincidence, as grief recognizing grief, but it gnawed at her. She had spent her life reading people, sensing when numbers or stories didn't add up. And this didn't. The next morning, she returned to the cemetery earlier than usual. The dew still clung to the grass, glinting in the pale light. She told herself it was for peace, for closure, but deep down, she was hoping they'd come again. And they did. The same young woman walked slowly toward Daniel's grave, a hand resting on the child's shoulder. They moved like they belonged there. Eleanor watched from her car, unseen, her pulse quickening as the woman knelt and whispered something she couldn't hear. The girl laid a small bouquet, wildflowers, freshly picked, and set the same folded photograph at the base of the headstone. Eleanor stepped out, her heels sinking slightly into the damp ground. "Excuse me," she said softly. The woman flinched. Her eyes darted toward Eleanor, then away. "I'm sorry," she murmured quickly. "We didn't mean any harm." Eleanor's voice trembled, but she steadied it. "You knew my son?" A long pause. The woman swallowed hard. "Yes," she whispered. "I did." That was all she said before she turned, guiding the child toward the path. But Eleanor's gaze caught on the photo they left behind. She knelt and picked it up, her hands shaking. It was Daniel, smiling, alive, standing on a sunny porch with his arm around the same little girl. The woman stood beside them, her hand on his shoulder. Her face full of quiet affection, Eleanor's breath hitched. The picture wasn't old, 2 years, maybe less. It had been taken after Daniel's death. Or so she thought. She sat in her car for nearly an hour, staring at the photograph, the edges damp from the morning grass. There was no mistaking it. Her son looked healthy, alive, happy. And the woman's expression, there was love there and loss too. Eleanor needed answers. That night, she searched every trace of Daniel's past she could find. Emails, phone records, the calendar she hadn't dared to open since his accident. And then she saw it. A series of small transfers made monthly for nearly a year before his death, to the same name she didn't recognize, Naomi Blake, the same woman from the cemetery. Her heart pounded. Daniel had been supporting her. Why? Who was she to him? A charity case? A secret relationship? A mistake he'd hidden? By dawn, Eleanor was already in her car, the photograph tucked safely in her coat pocket, following the address tied to those transfers. A rundown neighborhood. Faded paint, cracked sidewalks, the kind of place her son would never have gone. And yet, as she parked across the street from a small, worn-out apartment building, she saw the same little girl standing by the window, clutching a toy bear, smiling faintly as the woman Naomi brushed her hair. Eleanor's throat tightened. The child had Daniel's eyes, and in that instant she knew this wasn't coincidence. This was truth, buried under years of silence. Eleanor's hand hovered over the door handle for a long time before she finally stepped out. The air felt heavier here, thick with the scent of frying oil and old paint. She walked up the worn steps, her heels clicking softly against the wood. When Naomi opened the door, her eyes widened, not with surprise, but with resignation. "I knew you'd come," she said quietly. Eleanor's throat tightened. "You knew my son." It wasn't a question. Naomi nodded, her gaze dropping. Behind her, the little girl peeked out, clutching the bear tight. Daniel's eyes stared back at Eleanor, wide, curious, impossibly familiar. Her knees nearly gave out. Inside, the apartment was simple, clean but marked by struggle. A small table, a few framed photos, drawings scattered on the fridge. One of them caught Eleanor's attention, a stick-figure family drawn in crayon. Mommy, Daddy, me. Eleanor's voice cracked. He was her father?" Naomi nodded again, tears filling her eyes. "He was going to tell you. He didn't get the chance. That night..." She stopped, her hand trembling. "He was driving back from here." "From us." Eleanor felt the room tilt. The accident. The road, the storm. He hadn't been coming from work. He'd been coming home from them. Naomi wiped her face. "He helped us. Not with money, well, yes, that too, but he was here. Every weekend, reading her stories, fixing things. He loved her, Miss Price. He loved her so much." The little girl shuffled closer, her small voice barely a whisper. "Mommy says you're my grandma." Eleanor froze. Her heart broke cleanly in two. Naomi's voice softened. "I never wanted anything from you. I just wanted her to know who he was, that he was good." Eleanor knelt down slowly, eye level with the child, tears spilling freely. She reached out, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. "He was the best," she whispered. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt something shift, not grief, not anger, just understanding. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, light spilling across the cracked floor. Eleanor stayed long after the conversation ended. The apartment was small, but it felt alive, full of laughter, drawings, and the faint scent of pancakes from the morning. Everything Daniel had lost. Or maybe everything he'd quietly built away from the noise of her world. When she finally stood to leave, Naomi tried to stop her. "You don't have to," but Eleanor shook her head gently. "I do." She reached into her coat and pulled out the photograph, the same one she had found at the grave. "This belongs here," she said, setting it back on the table beside the child's crayon drawing. "He'd want it to stay with you." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "He always said you were strong," she whispered, "that you'd understand someday." Eleanor smiled faintly, the kind that hurts more than it heals. "I wish I had sooner." Outside, the street looked different now, not poorer, not broken, just real. The kind of place where her son's heart had found peace when his life in luxury had left him empty. She stood by her car for a long moment, looking up at the window where the little girl waved shyly from behind the glass. Eleanor raised her hand, smiling through the tears. That night she returned to the cemetery. The lilies she had left wilted in the cold air, but she didn't replace them. Instead, she whispered softly into the wind. "She's beautiful, Daniel. You'd be proud." A quiet peace settled over her chest, something she hadn't felt since the day she buried him. She realized grief doesn't always end with answers. Sometimes it ends with acceptance. The next week, she made a decision. Naomi and her daughter would never struggle again, not while she was alive. Not as penance, but as love. Because some legacies aren't written on headstones. They're carried in the hearts of those left behind. And as Eleanor walked away from her son's grave for the last time, she knew this wasn't the end of her mourning, just the beginning of something finally right.